Okay, so I think we are going to start now. So good evening, afternoon, and good morning for you, David. And so welcome to our first session of this second training program on gender biases in science that we are holding as the Gender Equality Committee from the CBD in Seville. And so this first session is going to consist on a seminar on, so the general topic of the session is leadership diversity and team management. And for that, we are going to have first a talk given by David Caballero. And then we will have a round table in which ELENA Gómez-DÍAZ, BELÉN, PÉREZ, and JAIME CARVAJAL will discuss some of the topics related to leadership and new different ways to do this, to have these leader positions. So just as a practical thing, I would ask you to switch off your cameras and your microphones while David is talking. And then if you want to ask any questions, so you can do it through the chat in Zoom, the ones that are in Zoom and in YouTube. So the chat is also available, so you can also ask questions through the YouTube channel. So now, I'm just going to introduce David. So David is a former student for the biotechnology degree at the University Pablo de Olavide. And so after finishing, he had several experiences in public and private sector, in the private sector. And now, so he's currently the founder of the Global Innovation Pathway. So he's going to tell us today about his experience with this new initiative. So David, whenever you want.
Thank you, Isabel, for the introduction. You can hear me well, I hope.
Yes.
Yes, great.
And
okay, fantastic. It's a pleasure for me to be part of this workshop today because I have a lot to thank to the researchers at CABD, both as professors when I was studying biotechnology in Sevilla, but also as supervisors, as I can count about 4 labs in that institute where I mess up some experiments. My career path is not the traditional in academia. I didn't do a PhD, postdoc, and so on, but neither is the traditional in industry. Very soon after I did my master in business, I could join a large pharmaceutical company in their leadership development program. And that enabled me during 2 years to move across different parts of the organization, working in different roles. So that way I get some experience in marketing, portfolio management, business development, finance and project management. And after that, I became kind of an entrepreneur in the organization to create a new research team within a smaller group. So we started being 4 people. And by the time I left, we were already 40. And part of my role within the leadership team of that unit was both to manage people directly, that they reported to me, and also manage multidisciplinary teams where we were developing therapies and there will be people contributing from regulatory, from genomics, from statistics. And most cases, actually, they will be done in collaboration with academia or with biotech companies, as I was heading the external cooperations team. So my role was to evaluate and identify and to lead collaborations with external parties. However, that finished about a year and 4 months now, when I started traveling around the world with 2 projects. One of them, Evolving Education, is about learning and sharing examples about how to develop 21st century skills, such as emotional intelligence and critical thinking. And the other one, Global Innovation Path, it's about supporting entrepreneurs developing innovations for social or environmental impact. And this has taken me now to 10 countries in the Middle East, Asia, and I'm just starting now in Latin America. I'm in Mexico currently. I hope that these diversities of experiences and the examples that I will share you'll find them intriguing or stimulating for the discussion that we'll have afterwards. So when posed with this question about leadership and diversity in academia, I asked myself, okay, so what can I learn about this topic? And I had a look online, and I found this website called the Thesis Whisperer. They say it's like a horse whispering, but with more pages. And they have this article named, "Should You Quit Your PhD?" Which is not a silly question, considering that about half the people that started PhDs never finished them. And this article has been seen by more than 30,000 people and has more than 300 comments. So I see lots of interest in this topic. And within the comments, people say why they left academia or why they stayed in academia. I didn't have to analyze the comments by myself because the authors of this website had already reviewed them and compared them with the existing literature, as they are also academics themselves. And among the top 3 reasons why people say that they leave academia, that they leave their PhDs, is the supervisor or PI. But also among the top 3 reasons why people say that they stay in academia is also the supervisor. So it's not that the supervisor is evil or an angel. It's simply that the role of the team leader in a research group is hugely important for the work environment and for each individual person. And this made me think and wonder how different is the training that the supervisor gets in academia compared to what they have experienced in industry. And in industry, when you join as a scientist, maybe after your PhD, you develop your career, and there are 2 main paths that open up to you. You can keep on going as a subject matter expert, or you can develop as a team leader. So let me put an example. My former colleague, Sarah, she was the best immunology I've ever met. She was a subject matter expert. She was in her late 50s. She had done her PhD and postdoc in immunology, and she joined the company to work in autoimmune diseases. After a while, she changed to study respiratory diseases, but also from an immunology perspective. And later on, she started developing new technologies within the platform technologies group, but also leveraging the immunology, developing technologies such as antibodies and antibody fragments. And when I was working with her, we were working in immuno-oncology, so also leveraging immunology to fight cancer. She was involved in multiple projects, inputting with her expertise. For me, she was super valuable to evaluate technologies from external parties, to evaluate potential academic collaborations. Her role was relevant in regulatory submissions because of the depth of expertise that she added there. She managed some PhD students that were doing their PhDs in industry. And, you know, as you see, she was providing her expertise in a variety of subjects. As a team leader, I can think of my previous boss, Cedric. Cedric trained as a medical doctor, but he never finished his residency. He started a PhD, but quit after a year, and he joined a startup where he could have a lot of responsibility and being involved in a lot of roles since the beginning. So he was involved in coordinating the projects, in studying what budgets they need, hiring people, putting people in the right place, communicating the message of the organization to potential investors, but also internally. A set of skills and training that enable him to be a great leader, to be able to motivate people, to understand which people were best fit to take a stretch, to take a project that was more challenging, and so on. And if you think for anyone that has developed team leadership, project management skills to move into being a subject matter expert, there's obviously a lot of things that will need to be developed, right? Sarah didn't reach there just from one day to the next. She had to develop a lot of expertise, and she was continuously learning about immunology. And it's exactly the same in the opposite direction. And it's, I think, a common misconception for scientists when they join industry, that maybe they see team leaders to being more visible or attractive position, and they want to switch from one place to another very rapidly without adapting their behavior without developing the required skills. And this can lead to some clashes. So also in my previous role, one of my colleagues, Miriam, she was going through this transition. She was now managing a little team of biologists that were developing a package of information. And she was the most experienced person in gene therapy. And she was used for the most experienced person to be the person that told everyone else what they needed to do. So people were complaining that she was authoritarian, that they didn't feel that they could contribute to the project. So I had gone through that position and was now kind of managing a broader project and was trying to help her to develop some of those skills and coaching her into it. And while we were talking, she told me something that was very insightful. She told me, it's easier for you because you know less. And I think that up to a point, she was right. Not necessarily because I knew less, but because I was more willing to listen. I was acutely aware that the diversities of perspectives that were represented in the team were hugely important for the success of the project, and that my role was to bring the best of them into it. So why do I tell you these three stories? This is just to reflect about the differences with the path of an academic leader, right? Where along your career, through your PhD, postdoc, and so on, what is selected, what is promoted along that pathway is subject matter expertise. It's how good you're at science. But at some point, it reaches this stage of being a supervisor, and suddenly you're managing people, you're managing a budget, you're asking for resources, or you are embedded within a large and bureaucratic organization where you need to manage stakeholders and communicate with the department head and with different people. And these are skills that don't just come up from one day to the next, right? So these are things that we need to develop, and the fact that you are here in this presentation means that you are willing to develop these skills and you're interested in developing them. So that's a massive step forward. When I asked scientists that came from academia what was the biggest difference when they joined industry, however, the #1 difference that all of them mentioned was teamwork. They said before it was my project, now it's our project. I'm now just contributing a small piece to a larger pie. And this is a requirement, whether you are a subject matter expert or a team leader, to be successful and in this environment. And I think that's also something that can contribute in academia to research output. And another thing I would like to mention is diversity. And I would say it's work in progress, because I have experienced a lot of diversity of expertise, of working in multidisciplinary teams where there's people with expertise in bioinformatics, people that know a lot about the biology of diseases, people that know a lot about technologies to interact with those diseases, statisticians of clinical trials, medical doctors, regulatory, commercial people, letting us know what are the biggest unmet needs within the patient population. So see lots of things that need to come together to bring a therapy from conception to patients. But that's a small fragment of what diversity is. And I would like to continue by discussing with you what are the dimensions of diversity. When we talk about diversity, we tend to think mostly about gender, race, maybe sexual orientation, but there are a lot of other aspects that make me who I am and that make you who you are. The income level of the family you were grown up into, whether you have children or not, how long you have been in the organization. So I would like to interact with you now a little bit by asking you this question. What dimensions of diversity do you see represented in your organization? And if someone wants to unmute themselves and say a couple of things that you can see in your organization.
Well, everybody is very shy, so I would say that within our institute, there is a lot of diversity, especially for an institution in Seville. So there is people from different places. There's different ethnicities in there, for example. And there's young people, old people, people with kids, people with grandchildren. I think in that sense is quite diverse. I mean, it's from my experience in what is Spanish science. Not that I have a lot, because most of my life has been abroad. But I would say that in terms of Spanish research is quite diverse, and there is all sorts of levels. So there's people with different levels of education. There's people who have Spanish. Most of them have Spanish as the first language, for example. But in general, I would think that it's quite diverse.
Thank you, Jaime. That's a very complete answer. Thank you. Okay, so we're talking about diversity and why diversity is important. Well, people with different backgrounds and different experiences often see the problem in different ways, and therefore they can come up with different solutions. And in a study of about 1,700 companies in different countries, they show that an increase in diversity of the leadership team leads to more and better innovation. And that the key metric in industry, right, is finally financial performance. So essentially, when companies had a diverse leadership team, they were able to develop more innovative products and services more often, and they derived more revenues from them. But it's not only in industry that diversity is relevant. Also in academia, diversity wins. There are many studies that shows that an increase in diversity within the research team leads to better research outputs. And this means more papers, but also the quality of those papers by measuring the number of citations that those papers have. And I really like this sentence from Nature that says, being inclusive gives research groups a competitive edge. It also happens to be the right thing to do. What does it happen in reality? When you look for the top people in any given category, you find pretty homogeneous lists. So I look for the top comedians, the top chefs, and the top athletes in Spain. And I found this list where most of the people you see here are men, right? And there are a couple of factors that explain this. One of them is the lack of role models. If I don't see people in a group that I associate with, I can think that I'm not welcome in that group, or that I don't have the required skill set to become part of that group. For instance, if I want to become a comedian in Spain and I'm a woman, I can think that female humor is not fun, or that women are not welcome in that sector, because there's very few examples that I can look up to and I can think, I want to become like that person. On the other hand, there's our unconscious bias for similarity. Essentially, we empathize more easier with people that look like us. So if empathy means to be able to stand in the shoes of another person, the more similar that other person is to us, the easier for us to stand in their shoes, to see the world the same way they see it, right? And in fact, similarity is one of the tools for influence and persuasion. If you go to buy a car, for instance, the salesman will spend some time talking with you and asking you some personal questions, trying to find things that you have in common. Maybe you like the same food, or you have been on holidays in the same place, because having things in common help us to reach an agreement. So what happens in the workplace is that people in senior positions that are managing others end up unconsciously spending more time mentoring those that look like them, give more opportunities to people that look like them, and also give more space for people to fail and to learn from their failures when they are more similar to themselves. And all of this obviously reinforces this bias against diversity. I added here a little map to remind me of an example I wanted to tell you about this. And it happened recently when I was in Jordan, and I was interviewing entrepreneurs that are working in biotech or digital healthcare. And for my surprise, most of them were women. And you know, this is the Middle East, it's not what I was expecting. So I asked one of them, how is it that most of the entrepreneurs I'm meeting here are women? And she told me, if you look in the banking, in energy, in chemicals, in established industries, the senior sector is already monopolized by men. However, in new industries, there's still no one at the top. So everyone gets a better chance. And you see a representation of diversity that is more similar to what there is already in society. And how does this look in academia? So I look for the percentage of women in academia in the European Union in average, and also at the CABD Institute. So the first percentage that you see is the average in Europe, and the second is at the CABD. And as you see here, there's a pretty good balance from undergraduate to PhD to postdoc, more or less 50-50, which represents what happens in society in terms of men and women. It is when we reach the senior positions, the PI positions, when there's a massive drop in the representation of women. So there's definitely work to be done up here to make sure that women can also reach those senior positions. And looking at this graph, it made me wonder, is there really any difference between men and women capabilities for leadership roles? And the short answer is no. There's no difference. Studies of more than 7,000 leaders in public, private, government, different countries, different sectors, all of them show the same, that when you look at the competencies that are associated with leadership, men and women perform equally. But then why there's such a, why diversity remains so elusive in academia? And there are some factors. In addition to the lack of role models, and our inherent bias to prefer people that look like us. In academia, there's also the merit principle. And this is the fact that people think that I am fair, that I can make fair decisions based on merit, based on how good people are academically, how good they are in their scientific field, which kind of reminds me to the concept of the Homo economicus. And this is a concept that economists used to use to model the market. And in these models, people were fully rational, able to extract all the information available in the world to make decisions to maximize their profit. And obviously those models did not work. Those models did not represent the real economy. Behavioral economics needed to develop for economists to start using models for people, for Homo sapiens, that look a lot more like Homo emotionalis. Yes, we are biased, we are emotional, we are affected by social pressures, and we make a lot of mistakes. So we need to accept that I am biased, I have prejudices, because none of us have been raised in a fully pluralistic society. None of us have been raised in a society where men and women were given the same weight, where all religions are considered the same, where all sexual orientations are equally relevant. That world simply does not exist, okay? Hopefully we are walking towards it. Every day it's a step forward, but we are not there yet. So if none of us have been raised in this fully pluralistic world, then none of us can make completely fair decisions based on how good people are at their jobs. And it's only by accepting that we have biases and prejudices that we can get closer to make more fair decisions, by trying to understand how our biases may be affecting our decisions. For all of these reasons that I have mentioned, there's a phenomenon that is very common in the workplace, and it's called identity covering. And this is when people downplay pieces of their identity that they think they are unwelcome to fit in the group. And it's so common that it's about 7 out of 10 people, right? Even straight white men display it in about 50% of the cases. So it's really prevalent. And are things like a gay person that won't bring their partner to the Christmas party, or someone going through mental illness that uses vacation days rather than saying that they're going to the doctor. It can show up in different ways, such as altering appearance. For instance, I can think in a scientific academic environment, not showing a Christian cross, skewing affiliation, so avoiding behaviors that are stereotypically associated with that identity or group, avoiding advocacy. For instance, if you're homosexual and you hear someone making a joke about homosexual and not standing up for yourself, and association evasion, so not mixing up with that group of people that represent the identity that you don't want others to associate you with. And the problem with all of this, in addition of being unethical, is that it drowns our energies. We cannot be our best if we are not allowed to be ourselves, if we're all the time constantly monitoring ourselves not to show one part of our identity. This is particularly prevalent in women in leadership because of the mismatch between how women are seen and the qualities and behaviors that people associate with leadership, which tends to be quite masculine behaviors. This is the reason, for instance, why Margaret Thatcher took classes to lower her tone of voice, because people were not used for a prime minister to speak with a woman's voice. And also the reason why some women, when they take leadership position, they drift away from assertiveness towards aggressiveness, because they think that to fit in that group, to perform in that role, they need to behave more aggressively. So for all of this, we cannot just talk about diversity, we also need to talk about inclusion. And diversity is the who is being recruited, who is being promoted, who is around the table. And inclusion is the how. What are the behaviors that enable this diversity to flourish, to show up? It's too passive to just hire people that show diversity on the surface and just let magic happen. But you also need to change management and policies to make sure that they can be themselves and they can bring that diversity to ensure that that huge improvement in innovation actually happens. And these are things like participative leadership, where managers value employee contributions, and people think that they can speak up and they can contribute to leadership decisions. Making sure that the people at the top make diversity and inclusion a top priority and they communicate so quite frequently to everyone. And having fair employment practices so that people in similar positions have an equal pay. Okay, so far we have been talking a lot about leadership, but we have not defined yet what is leadership. And I would like to stop here again and ask you, what are the traits or the characteristics that you associate with leadership? So let's see if this time we can get a bit more of participation. It would be great if 2 or 3 people say a couple of words that they associate with leadership. Or alternatively, you can also write it in the chat if that's easier, and I can read them out. Let's try with the chat.
I would say that a good leader can help his team, and he's like the first among equals, not above them.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
For example. Yeah.
Okay, so being at the same level, trying to support people from their level. I can see in the chat also active listening. Yes, so making a conscious decision to listen to others, not to respond or to challenge, but to understand. I see here also communication, having good communication skills, being able to motivate others. You are saying responsibility. So you do have a responsibility. People are going to ask you what happens if things don't happen. Mentoring, which means sharing your expertise, but allowing people to making their own decisions. Guide you through bad events and bad results, which is also understanding. We all are gonna fail a lot more than we succeed on average. So we need someone that help us to learn from those mistakes and to help us to grow from them. Exactly. And delegating, I also see here, finding out what are the things that you can leave for other people to do. Great. And I see here inspiration, inspiring to others. So essentially not saying how things need to be done, but just projecting that view of what we're aiming for and allowing people to develop their own path. And being trustworthy. Obviously, it needs to be someone that you can trust, right? Because it's someone that you are following in a way. Thank you. Thank you for all the comments in the chat. I'm going to continue then with the presentation. So with all these skills, I'm not going to give you a textbook definition of what is leadership, but I'm going to tell you what leadership means for me. And for me, leadership means to bring the best out of team members to reach objectives by ensuring clarity of common goals, leveraging the value of diversity, keeping a beginner mindset, and this is being curious, listening, humble, support and motivate everyone, and lead by example. You cannot just say these things for others to do and don't portray them yourself. You need to be the role model of anything that you're saying. So all these things that we have mentioned are a lot of skills, a lot of tools that obviously need to be developed. And if we look at leadership toolbox, I started writing things that I associate with tools that a leader should have, and there's a ton of them. The list can go on and on. And I wouldn't say that any of these things are rocket science, but they're definitely continuous personal development. They touch things that are very core in us, things like self-confidence, like empathy, like conflict resolution. So on one hand, I want to tell you, yes, these things can be developed. It's not something inherent. Everyone can develop them with more or less effort, but it takes time. It takes time because it's something, it needs a lot of self-reflection and introspection to be able to develop many of these skills, or the basics, the pillars that enable you to then develop other more complex skills like motivation or conflict resolution or recognition are based on a very good self-awareness and empathy and some of these things. So obviously, it's not something that we can learn in a couple of hours on a Thursday evening, but something I need to develop a long time, maybe doing some online courses or reading some books or watching some YouTube videos, but it's something that needs to happen continuously. But I wanted to share with you at least one of these skills that I think is related also with diversity. And it starts with this image. And if you can use the chat maybe and let me know what do you see in this image. Maybe some of you have seen it before, but what do you see in there? Okay, so some people say a young woman, some people say an old lady, some people see both. So let me show them to you. So in the case of the young women, this is the eyelashes, the nose, the chin. This will be her necklace. And in the case of the old lady, this is her nose, her eye, her mouth, and her chin. So even when presented with the same image, different people see different things. And this is because of perceptions. The world doesn't exist merely on itself, but also as it appears to me, right? we are all thinking that we have the truth, that we can see the world, that we can understand how things are, but the reality is that we only see a fraction of it. And it's only by listening to other people's perspectives that we can expand our understanding of the world. And for this, we have a great tool that is called feedback. And feedback is not criticism or judgment. It's simply sharing observations about someone's behavior or work performance to help them to grow. And this is the key here. It's not to blame or to look for revenge, but it is to help people to grow and develop. So it is a fantastic tool for continuous personal development because it helps us to uncover our blind spots, the things that we don't see about ourselves, but other people are seeing. And it's also a great tool for conflict prevention, because if we don't talk things out, they can start piling up in this massive monster that at some point explodes into a real conflict. But for feedback to happen appropriately, people need to be receptive to feedback, and people need to know how to communicate feedback appropriately. So let's look at some examples about how to communicate feedback. Here's the first one. Listen, I looked at the data files the other day and it was a complete mess. Always the same, isn't it? Let's go for the second. Hey, having a good day? How's the family? And how are the data files? Because I was wondering what would happen if I wanted to pull some data. And the final one. I've been looking at the data files. It looks that you have not made any records since March. We agreed that the information will be recorded and available within a week. It is produced for everyone to use. I'd like to discuss with you what we can do to ensure this happens. I think it's pretty straightforward to see which is the good one and which are not the right ones. And if we analyze these messages, there will be some trends, some insights that will emerge. One of them is that we will focus on the problem, not on the person. It's not your personality that is wrong. It's not that you are a mess. It's that there's a mess in the cabinet, in the data files. That's different. We focus on the specifics rather than on generalizations. If there's a mess in the data files, that's happening now. And maybe it happened also 2 months ago, but it's not always a mess. We focus on facts rather than judgments. And the key difference is that facts are things that you can describe accurately and that other people will describe as close to your version as possible, right? So I look at the data files and this is exactly what I saw, rather than making my interpretation of it. Next, we focus on change. The reason why we're giving feedback is because we want to reinforce a positive behavior, which positive feedback is good to give as well, or we want to change something. So it's not just to release our energy, we're really looking for a change through this message. So we need to think very, very thoroughly about what exactly do we need to change and in which way we want that thing to change, right? It can be that the problem that you're dealing with, you don't think that the other person is possible for them to change, maybe because of themselves or because of the environment or other issues, and feedback is not the tool to resolve that conflict in that case. And finally, across this process, we are focused on their relationship. I'm giving you feedback because I care about you, because I respect you, and because I want our relationship to be stronger and not for us to part away. That's why I'm taking a stance and I'm providing you with this feedback. And to remember these things in a more simplified way, we can think about feedback as a gift. So if you think about it, it's really a gift, it's really a present, because maybe I didn't have to get out of my way and get into a potential confrontation, a bit of an uncomfortable situation, but I'm doing it because I care about you, because I want to contribute to your personal development, and I want to contribute to our relationship being stronger and to our team being able to work together better. So I'm really making an effort here, and I'm giving you that effort, this gift. So within this gift, the G stands for being generous, for giving as much feedback as you can, being authentic, when giving and also receiving feedback. I is for the incident, to focus on the specifics of the incident, on things that can be described. Like to take another example, I cannot just say, you're always angry with me. We need to say, go to the specifics. Yesterday evening, during your presentation, when I ask a question. Okay, that's the incident. Now we focus on the facts to describe what happens, not on judgments. I don't say, yesterday evening, during the presentation, when I asked a question, you were aggressive with me. No, I say, at that point, when I ask a question about how you made your calculations, you replied that you know how to make calculations. That's a fact. That's something that other people also saw. That's what happens as objectively as we can. And then I can add the emotional impact that that had on me. Because of what you said, because of your reaction, I felt threatened. I felt that that was an aggressive behavior towards me. Because if I say that you are aggressive, what does that mean? What means to be aggressive? For which culture? In which context? At which level of energy, or based on which mood? That's a perception that has a lot of filters in between what happened and how I understood it. On the other hand, if I describe what happened as objectively as I can, and then I add how I felt, no one can challenge how I feel. Independently of what happened outside, I can share how I feel for people to understand me. And finally, the takeaway. As I said, we are focused on a change or reinforcement of behavior. So what do we want to change? So in this case, in this example, I will say, let me know how do you want me to ask you questions so that we can contribute to each other's work. Maybe that person is not comfortable receiving questions during the presentation and they prefer to speak after the meeting. Or maybe it was just that it was that day that they were angry for another reason, maybe something personal that happened at home. But we were looking for how to improve this situation. And in this case, how to make sure that we contribute to each other's work, focusing on that relationship. So remember, feedback is a gift. And so far, we have talked about how to give feedback. But what happens when you receive the feedback? That's a different situation altogether, right? Because when you receive feedback, now you are in charge of changing. You are the one that are in control of modifying your behavior or whatever you receive the feedback for. And the thing is that there are lots of people that are terrible at giving feedback. They may say it aggressively or very emotional, or it may be so subtle that you don't really know what they mean. Or maybe they don't even say something and they just close the door and leave. But whatever it is the way, whichever it is the way that feedback is communicated, there's an important message hidden there. It's an important message to uncover our blind spots and something that can help us to develop and grow. So we should strive to be the best at receiving feedback, to making the best out of it. But the problem is that we have a lot of barriers to hear feedback. We're all experts at finding why the feedback that we receive is wrong. So, and there are three main reactions. The first one is truth triggers. You are wrong, which assumes that I am right, that I know the world, rather than I know a perception of the world. So we need to remember that whatever it is, even if we're talking about science, of experiments, we all know that different experiments performed by different people in different labs work differently sometimes. So it's worthwhile listening to other people's perspectives. The second point is relationship. Who are you to tell me, right? And for that, we need to separate the messenger from the message. It may be that the person giving us the feedback is the new trainee that has very little experience and has been in the department for very little time. But it may be that they are the most brave person and is telling us a blind spot that everyone around us knows. And is that person who is helping us to uncover it. And finally, there are identity triggers. And these are things that are very unique of each of us. These are things that make us jump into emotions, into fight or flight conditions. Maybe it is something related with someone mentioning something about your home country, or someone mentioning something about the quality of your work, or about how long it took you to do a piece of work. Whatever it is, we all have within us things that trigger us, that make us stop being able to listening to people, because now we are kind of angry or responsive or emotional. So part of self-awareness is to be able to uncover those identity triggers that we have, so that when we hear someone talking about it, we can understand that this is something that affects me particularly. So I'm gonna control myself so that I'm able to listen and I'm able to make the most out of this interaction. And if feedback is so good, we can also actively seek feedback, and we can ask people what we can do to do better, what are we doing well. And a structured way to do this is called after action review. So it's very simple. It's essentially after any presentation, meeting, or on a stage of a project, you simply write on the board what happened well and what can be improved. And you do like a very quick brainstorm in 5 minutes, 10 maximum, where people very quickly say, oh, I really like this, I didn't like this, I didn't like this, I think this other thing could be done a bit differently, how about this other thing? So you capture a lot of ideas in a very short period of time about how to improve the project, the process, the way we work together. And before the next one, you review it. For instance, before the next presentation or the next meeting, you review it to make sure that you incorporate some of those learnings. And I think the best example I've seen about how feedback can be implemented in an organization, I saw it randomly also in Jordan, in a school. And over there, the principal had instructed the teachers that each week they had to take one class from one of their colleagues, from another teacher. So this did two things. On one hand, they had to sit at the same level as the students, you know, being there, sitting, listening to the teacher for 1 hour, so kind of empathize with the students. And on the second hand, they were listening to one of their colleagues, so they could see when the content was engaging, when I lost attention, when I felt that the class was out of control, and I will provide them with this feedback after the class. So imagine, I think this is the ideal way for someone to become the best teacher in the world, because if every week you have a different person that comes to your class and gives you very valuable feedback, this valuable gift about how you can become better, this is the way to be not just the best teacher, but the best anything you want to do, to keep on receiving these pieces of feedback. And obviously, this is not something that happened spontaneously. So the principal initially kind of guided or facilitated this exchange of information so that people felt more comfortable about, okay, this is what happened, this is how I felt, this is what I think that I would do differently. And little by little, as people got more comfortable with sharing with each other, he stepped back and let people give feedback to each other by themselves. And the idea was that with time, there's no need even to have this structured process, but that people get used to the idea of giving feedback to each other freely. All right, I said that I was gonna give you just one tool, which is feedback, but there was another one that I thought that's really relevant in academia, and I just want to give you a hint into it so that you go on and explore more for yourself. And this is energy for performance. And the reason why I say that it's relevant is because mental health in academia is a real problem. It's a real issue. We're used to talk about our physical health, whether I go running in the mornings or do yoga in the evenings, if I'm in a diet or not. But mental health is such a big taboo, something we never talk about, even though all of us have a mental health and all of us need to care for our mental health. And it seems that in academia, conditions like depression and anxiety are up to 10 times higher than in the general population. I'm not saying this is an issue of leadership necessarily. There are many other components in the system, such as job instability, but I think that leadership can do something. And for that, I would like to look at this pressure performance curve. So if we start in the bottom of it, where there's low pressure and low performance and people feel bored, we move up to a comfort level where we are delivering to expectations, we are delivering results, we are doing our work, we are performing well. And once in a while, there's something we need to learn new. There's a period of a stretch where I need to learn a new technique. Maybe I'm contributing to the projects of a colleague. Maybe there's a new arm that opens up in my project for a time period. But ideally, we want to be most of the time in comfort, and once in a while go to a stretch and come back to comfort. If we stay in a stretch for too long, or we receive so much pressure, so much stress, they take us all the way to strain and beyond. Now that level of pressure is actually decreasing our performance. And we see people that stop making good decisions, they have poor judgment, they stop enjoying what they're doing, when even before maybe they were doing it even for free, when they were interns, now they're not enjoying their work anymore. And it can take us all the way, if this continues, to burnout. And I don't know if you have experienced this in your lives, but I have experienced it from a close friend, and it's a serious thing. Reaching burnout takes people months to come out of it, and to be able to come back to that work environment that made them feel so bad with themselves, from that anxiety and depression. So what can leadership do here? On one hand, getting to know your people very well, the people that you are managing as a PI or supervisor, so that you know who is ready for a period of a stretch to learn something new, to take an additional project, and who needs to slow down a little bit, even though they may be asking for more, because sometimes we always want more, but it may not be the right time. Maybe we need to slow down a bit. And on the other hand, to coach people so that each of them identifies what's the right work-life balance for them, and what's the right recovery practices that work for them. For some people, maybe running in the middle of the day. For some others, maybe having a chat and a tea every couple of hours. We all have different ways to recover, and we all have different work-life balance that work for us. But we need to identify how to manage our energies on a mental level, on a physical level, and on an emotional level. And this is something we need to find out to really stay healthy. All right, so we're reaching the end of the presentation, and I'd like to conclude with this fancy diagram, where I want to say that along your career, as you move on from PhD, postdoc, all the way to PI and beyond, you are already developing your subject matter expertise. You're already reading a lot of papers every week and working on it. Think also about how you're going to develop your leadership skills, right? Whether you're going to read a book about coaching or watching some YouTube videos, what works for you. But remember, that is something that's going to take time to develop, and that you need to put effort on it. And across this path, allow diversity and inclusion to be the pillars that sustain the innovation of your team. Thank you very much. And I would like to also let you with a couple of recommendations. One of them is an online course about women in leadership in Coursera. And the other one is a TEDx talk from William Ury, who is an expert negotiator that has been involved in conflict resolution, in terrorism cases, and things like this, about the power of listening. So thank you for your attention. And now I'll be all ears for your questions and discussion.
Thank you, David. It was a really, really inspiring talk. I'm going to start my camera. Okay. So is there any question in the chat or in the YouTube? Otherwise, I can ask some things, but I prefer if other people ask some questions.
I would like to ask a question, if I may.
Yes, of course.
So, I mean, first of all, thank you for the talk. It was inspiring, and I think it will help a lot. One of the things that I'm not sure I disagree is a strong word, but So you mentioned the levels of stress in academia and how leadership could actually be related to that or not, right? But I would like to know, if you have the data, where you can locate those people in levels of stress. So is the MSc student less stressed with the PhD student, which is less stressed than the postdoc? And is the PI more stressed or less stressed than the PhD student? So, you know, how do those stress levels distribute across the academic path?
Good question. I actually don't have an answer for that question, but I'm sure that there's research about which part of the pathway is most stress. I read last week an article about Spanish researchers, and they were already researchers with 15 years of experience, and they were talking about the job insecurity, about how after 15 years and now accumulating 2 or 3 postdocs, they still didn't find a way to be able to set up in the same city or to have a contract that lasted for more than 2 years. But most of the data that I found out available was focusing sometimes on the PhD students, maybe because it's a large community that you can do pools and things like this. So definitely in the case of PhD students, mental health is also an issue. So I think it's distributed. Maybe it reaches a point when you are more tenure and you're established in the university where things start to slow down. But still, you need to keep working to keep having funding, right? And to keep being competitive at a scientific level. So the level of pressure is quite high across.
I was just asking because I thought that it's an interesting analysis, because it depends on where the point of maximum stress is, that where you have to put the strength to correct that, right? And it's possible that the answer is completely different at different levels, because the PhD will have certain pressures which will be completely different from those of a postdoc, and again completely different from those of a PI or a head of department.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Sorry, any other question? I have one. So, because, well, with this situation that we have now these days, so do you think the pandemics and all the lockdowns over the world is going to change the view that we have of leadership?
I don't see exactly how this will change necessarily the situation. Maybe it gives an edge to people that are more familiar and more versatile with digital technologies, with being able to communicate across the net. So maybe this gives an advantage to I don't know, younger generations or people that have been working in the digital industries in one way or another. But I've also seen reports, and some of the data they shared there was about women in leadership, was about how it's possible that there are not more women in leadership in the digital world, in tech companies, considering that's a new industry. And maybe it's also, and some of the women were saying that that was related also to investor sentiment, because maybe they were good managing their people, but when it became to presenting their company and so on to investors, now it was better if it was the one of their colleagues that was a man. So yeah, I don't think it will change drastically. Well, I don't have much information really to be able to contribute to that.
If I may, I think women have experienced this lockup in worse than men have. Basically, I'm not saying every woman or every man, but basically, especially those with families, okay, it's very easy to separate family and work while you walk out of your front door and go to work. Okay, if you're staying at home and your husband is staying at home, maybe that clear cut is not as clear. And I think a lot of women have been under an intensive pressure during all these months, more than men in general. That's my opinion.
Maybe it also helps to develop a sense of empathy. If the mother was the one staying at home, for instance, and now both of the parents are staying, it helps the father also to develop more empathy about all the work that's happening at work, at home, to make things happen, if that was the case. No?
It doesn't look like it's happening. But yeah. Okay, so any questions, or what about the YouTube people? Well, if not, I think, so thank you again, David. And so now we are going to continue because we are a bit behind schedule, but please, so if you want to stay, so you are more than welcome to stay in our round table. So now is, so we will have the, so can you stop sharing the screen, please? Thank you. Well, so now what we are going to go is to the round table, and for that we have, so David, if he wants to stay, of course, and then so Jaime Carvajal, which is a group leader from the CABD. Also ELENA GÓMEZ-DÍAZ, which is a group leader from the, sorry, I have the IPBLN in Granada, so the López Neira Institute of Parasitology and Biomedicine, and then BELÉN PÉREZ from the CBM in Madrid. So I think so now you can see our faces, and then so I'm going to let you to introduce yourselves, and then if you want, I can ask some questions, but if you have any comment, because so David's talk was so interesting that I have many comments too. So, but please, so go ahead if you want.
Shall I start, Isabel?
Yeah, cool.
So, well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure, and I feel very honored, especially after this great talk by David, that I was like, wow, I'm learning a lot. And this is something from, I think that anyone that is interested in leadership realizes how much you still needs to learn to be a good leader, because you never end learning and being trained to improve, and there is also always a path for improvement. No? Maybe what in my own experience is, I think that a very important attitude of a good leader is also being like realizing this, that you still have a lot of things to learn, and you have to trying and improving, and also I mean, being aware that you made mistakes and you can do it better. Because I have the impression that a lot of senior people that say, well, I'm very senior, I have a lot of years of experience, and and this gives me the credit or the merit to be a good leader. That was in the line that David was saying. So I think that this attitude is key. The humility, I don't know if it's a good word to define it. And well, I forgot about introducing myself, sorry. Well, yes, I'm researcher in parasitology, and I work in malaria. I have been a group leader since 5 years ago. I'm a Ramón y Cajal, ending soon. And well, my group has been quite small, and now is growing thanks to some funding. So I was very also curious about this talk, and I will use it a lot for now on. And more than on leadership, I'm more involved in women in science, and also in how this lack of role models and unconscious bias, and also active and and passive discrimination are pulling out women from research. Especially, I have also the impression that the more precarious the system, the more difficult it is for women to reach higher, no? So because the job, the competitions gets harder, and then in this hyper-competitive environment, women have less and less opportunities. So through these different initiatives of communities of practice at the level that we can work, we try to work on these different aspects.
Belén or Jaime, do you want to?
Maybe before we move on, I had just a suggestion, which would be fun if everyone turns up their cameras and we can kind of take a screenshot or something like this to show how many people are here, and you can distribute the CV to let people know it's worthwhile watching the YouTube video or something like this.
Hello.
Okay, so if you switch.
My name is BELÉN PÉREZ. I am professor in the university, and also I have a group in the CBM, in the Centro de Biología Molecular. I have a big group. I don't know, it's a big group. And also I have a group working in diagnosis of rare disease. I have many people with me. I have many students and researchers, predoctoral and also technician. I don't know what need for me in this round table. I have a large professional career. I never feel a discrimination in my work. I don't know why is this discrimination in the research in the Spanish women. And I don't know, I have 2 children, and now is a big children, but I believe that it's not important, and the question regarding the children is really, I don't know, is only asked to the women, never to the men, and for that I think it's no good question for me about the children, the home, the the house, and
So I'll just introduce myself. My name is Jaime Carvajal. I've been directing my research team at CAVD for the last 9 years or so. And now I am also Vice Director of the Institute. I am a working father. My wife had a very strong position in London. She was the Director of investments for the Spanish embassy. So very early I decided that my family was more important than my career. And I decided to take care of the education of my 4 kids. So in that sense, I used to take my kids to school in the morning. I used to pick them up. I used to do all the homework with them. That's why I say I'm a working father, right? So
nice word. I'm a woman. The same is the first the first difference between the society and us. We are work.
So in that sense, I you know, my wife was never at home. She was always having a dinner, or you know, traveling to Spain to the Malaga's film cinema. etc., etc. So I looked after the kids all the time, and I had a great time. I mean, something I will never change in my life. If I may, so for me, that has never been a problem, because I had my priorities very clear. My family were first. My career came second. But as it happens, you know, my career actually went not bad. We managed to, you know, get nice publications. We get funding usually, and we are okay. But you know, I think we should talk about maybe leadership in the sense that, you know, what my experience has been, and you know, how I learned to do what I do. So one of the first things that I have to say is that I was very fortunate. I had great supervisors, both during my PhD and my two postdocs in health. So there were people that took an interest in me, and they teach me things because they wanted to teach me things, and I wanted to learn. For example, so I remember my PhD supervisor organized a little course to teach us how to talk in public. And we will have a meeting every Friday, and they will show us how to speak in public and how to interact with people and how to use our body language and how to move around. And it was great, because I think, as I said in the chat, communication is for me, one of the most important skills that you can have as a leader. So you have to be able to talk one-to-one. It's important to look at, you know, people in their eyes and tell them what you think. But you also have to be able to talk with your research group. You also have to be able to talk at that departmental level, institution, etc., etc. So I think that communication is important. The other things that that I learned, and as I said, I wrote those things in the chat, is that you are responsible for everything that happens in your team. So both successes and failures are your responsibility. And that is important to also acknowledge. I think it's important that it was for me that I always say it as half as a joke, but it's half true, that my research team at the Institute is the happiest one, okay? And I believe it. And I believe it because I want them to feel that they're not coming just to work, to do their work and leave. We're like a small little family, and we have our interests, and we talk about what we do in the weekends. And I'm quite happy that my people, for example, they tend to go out together. And it's not only here in Sevilla, it's also happening in London. So you're like creating a small community and making people feel happy. But someone also said, you're always learning, and that's absolutely true. When I first got my team leader position, the first thing I did was to buy a book, and I recommend it to everyone. It's a great book. I wrote it down here because I bought it a few years ago, and it's called At the Helm, Leading Your Laboratory. And it's a great book. It tells you a bit of everything, just to actually tell you all the skills that you have to develop throughout the years. And you have to keep developing them. And for example, last week or 2 weeks ago, I was in conflict resolution course, which, funnily enough, they were telling some of the things that David has been talking about today. And one thing which is essential is how to communicate feedback. And then I will, like to say that David has said exactly the right thing. And not only works for your team, it works for your kids, okay? You tell them the facts. Your room is in a mess. How do you think I feel when I go by? Could you please do something about it? Don't judge, just state the facts. It does wonders, believe me, absolute wonders. I don't know if there is someone else who wants to contribute something else.
I think Anna has a question. Do you want, Anna, now that?
Yeah, thank you. Do you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, so indeed, now I have two questions. Because, I mean, the first one was most to compare the different experiences between the people that has a lot of experience in on leadership, like Jaime or Belén, compared to Elena, that has been a group leader for not that long time. And if you had any problem with any of your supervised co-workers, how did you manage and how did you, well, try to solve it? And the second question is, don't you think that even if we try super hard to create an equitative environment, the gap that exists between the bosses and the supervised people is still gonna be there? And that's it.
Well, if I start, I think that it's complicated because in science there is a very strong hierarchy, and there is a lot of pressure at every level. As Jaime was pointing before, as a PIs, we also are very stressed by different things. And as everyone, you have your good days and you have your bad days, and you have your time that you will be super happy and motivated, and other times that you will be also dismotivated and angry or sad or whatever. So, and depending on your character, it may be very difficult to keep the balance in this emotional mood, right? And not to leave those emotions to affect the people that that work with you. And this is what I find the most difficult, that my emotions do not affect the way I interact with others. And I guess that being a good leader is controlling this and to keep that balance in these different situations. And also to read people. Read people meaning that not everyone is the same, and there is no single recipe for everyone. You would have people that is very brilliant in some things and have a character, and another one that have a different character. And then the recipe will be different and has to be plastic depending on those different personalities. So, and I think that this is very difficult. And it's not only experience, good and bad experiences that shape how your leadership, but also training and I think that I by myself, I always think that I'm not a good leader. I mean, because I always think that I can do it better. So I don't know. I think it's more that I can do it better that the well that I do it. I don't know how to express myself, but so I always try to improve, and I think that this is a good attitude. I say it again because you are alert. You are always trying to evaluate yourself and say, okay, how I did it, what I can learn from this for the next time. And this is a continuous battle. And I think that this helps you to improve over time. This is my experience, and what I would recommend for anybody starting. Don't be too hard with yourself, but learn from experience and keep passion, because this is a process.
Well, I like to say just one thing, and it's something I learned a long time ago, and it's the phrase, fake it until you make it. Okay, so Elena, you are absolutely wonderful, a great leader. Believe it. Believe in you, and you will say that you change. Half of the strength that you have as a leader is believing that you're a leader. You know, nobody can tell you that you're not in the position you deserve to be. And if you believe that, even if you fake it, eventually you will make it. And I think that's important. If you look around, people who are leaders, very strong stance, okay? They know that they're leaders, or at least they fake that they know they're leaders. And I think half of it is believing that you can do it. That's my reading. Now, Anna mentioned this gap between the supervisors and the supervisees, okay? And I think that gap is a healthy one, okay? Because the supervisor has certain obligations and responsibilities, and it has to exist, that kind of gap. You have to look up to someone that you want to, get there. So that gap has to be there. But of course you can breach the gap. But I would say don't try to breach the gap too early, but you will get there. One of the things I learned from my supervisor when I was doing my second postdoc is something he said. It was amazing. He said to me, there is two kinds of postdocs, and you will see them very quickly. Those that always say yes, okay, and do what you tell them to do, those never get anywhere. And then you have the ones that they say yes, and then they go out and do whatever they want to do. And those are the ones I want in my lab, because those are the ones that actually go and change science. And it's when you start becoming that independent thinker that that gap between the supervisor and the member of the team disappears. And at one point you have someone sitting next to you, which is your postdoc, which is probably better prepared to do that job than yourself, and it disappears. But it's something that takes time to get there. I had a student, a second-year student, who was doing working for in the lab for a year, and I remember one time, and I said, "So what do you want to do when you finish?" And she said, "I want to be a boss." I said, "But what do you want to do?" "I don't care. I just want to be a boss." And that's not the attitude. You have to learn what you're doing, and then at one point, just you completely close that gap. It's natural.
I have a question for me from Gloria.
Yes.
Because yes, I have a co-leader in a big group. We are 2 IP, 2 women in the lab, and the experience is really excellent because we can share our experience and also our students and the facility in the lab. And also if one of us have a problem, a disease problem or a problem in the house or a problem with the classes in the university, the other have the whole group with her, and I can supervise all the students. I think it's a very good idea to have different leaders in the group, and we have more money to research, to investigate in the same field. We work in inherited metabolic disorder, and we share the experience, the students, the technician, and also the happy news and the bad news and everything. We are many people in the group, and I think to share the leadership is a very good idea.
Yeah, I want to. I think so. I agree totally with that, because so I have, well, I don't know what my PhD student thinks, because he's also co-supervised, so maybe he has a different idea. But I did my PhD with 2 supervisors. It was really, really good, because so they could really balance. And so, well, from the part of the PhD student, you need to learn which type of character each of them is. But so you can always, so in my case, I always have a very practical person that was like, okay, so figure one. And the other one was coming with these crazy ideas that were great, but so at the end, so you really, so they complement it very well. And at the end, you get all the good things from both the practical and the more idealistic part of the project. So
I have my student, and Lourdes has her students.
okay.
We have different projects, different grants. Lourdes has CIP of a grant, and I have another grant. We share in the same lab the experience, the facility, the methodology, the discussion about the paper, but we have different parts in the lab. And
I also think that I was thinking before about the question about that Jaime asked about PhDs and mental health in PhDs and PIs. I think that the problem that I see is that, for example, if you are a PI and you get a lot of stress, but you get a lot of reward of your work. You are recognized by what you do, and you get the credit of what you do. This is a very different from a PhD. So a PhD doesn't have that rewarding, that credit, that feeling that what he or she does is important, and he's somebody important and somebody that is recognized by their colleagues and their peers. And for academics, for people in academics, this is hugely important to get recognized and to get credit and to be visible. So I guess that this difference for me makes a lot of sense on how mental health impact differently on PhDs versus PIs, because this different hierarchy or this different moment where you are in the career. So I guess that a lot of the problems of mental, I'm not an expert, but it's just an opinion, but a lot of the problems comes from this environment in the lab where somehow the PIs helps that the PhD get this credit, this visibility, this rewarding. And so for this is so important what David says about giving positive feedback. Not necessarily all the time, but trying always to put first a bit of positive and then negative if necessary, right? But I think that for me, I guess that is important.
But it's obvious that we are all doing something wrong, because if the stress levels are 10 times higher than the general working population, we are doing something wrong at all levels, right? So, and I'm not sure what it is. I'm not sure, again, David might be able to respond to this, but, you know, is that data taken from Spanish community, or is this a world numbers? Are we talking about US? Because it's, you know, depending on where the data comes from, I think the answer is different. But regardless of that, I think, honestly, we are all doing something wrong. And I think what we are doing wrong, and maybe this time, you know, in forced quarantine is helping, maybe we should reconsider what our interests in life are. Okay? I think it will also help because, in my opinion, the single most important factor to cause stress is competitivity in competition. And that is a male character, I'm afraid to say. Okay? So if you could take most of that competitivity out of the equation and make it work, I think that stress will go down, and women moving into, more women moving into high positions will increase too. That's, I don't know, David is nodding there.
Yeah, I would like to add a bit more to that. So I think there's a lot of factors out of the data I found. So the data where it was 10 times higher, that was from the World Health Organization. Although I didn't look up if that was based only in the US or it was the general population. And then I found some other articles from congresses in the UK as well. And among the factors that they mentioned, something interesting was this preferred narrative in academia of keep on pushing, of this preferred narrative that, you know, through your PhD, through your career, whenever you are down, whenever things are not working, what you need to do is to keep on working more. And that if you keep on pushing and keep on working more, things will work out. When that can take people really to be really stressed and burn out and being tired of their work. And then there are some of those other factors that you mentioned. There's a lot of competition that many times is more in our head than in reality of, you know, if someone is going to publish something before. In some cases, I have seen it that particularly in like my partner, she was working with lots of people that came out of PhDs of Cambridge University. And there, the level of competition wasn't just with the world that was working in the same field, but was also even within the same lab, people were competing with each other, which I think is super unhealthy environment. And when they started working later on in industry, they didn't share results and they hid some of their tubes and things like these, things that are hard to understand when you're thinking from a teamwork perspective and contributing to the same project. And then some of the other factors, so I mentioned overwork, competition, and then uncertainty. So the fact that this is a pyramid, there's not necessarily positions for everyone that does a bachelor degree or a master's to do a PhD. There's less positions for a postdoc and so on. You know, at some point of that process, you can fall out of the system.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right there, but the problem is that it's also true that you grow in your scientific career with that ultimate goal. You're going to be a group leader, okay? And that's wrong. Because exactly because of what you said, so there's a pyramid. There is not a space at the top of the pyramid for everybody. But, you know, I did most of my career in the UK, and you have great positions there, which are independent of being a group leader. So having, you know, being a lab manager, it was great because there was a lot of people who did not want the responsibilities of being a group leader, but they were interested in, you know, a small part of management. So, and we've been talking to the CSIC heads, and I think that is coming. So there is the idea that they have to promote strongly the career of the laboratory technician. Okay, so they have to have a path exactly like the path of the academics. So you can actually progress through your career as a lab technician. When I was in the UK, my lab technician was 62 when I joined the lab. And he was the most knowledgeable person I've ever been with in a lab. And that is something that is, at least I think in Spain, is lacking. Most of the groups which are CSIC, they don't have any personnel who are with a permanent, apart from the PI. So that the PI has to carry on and to transfer these skills from, you know, one member to the lab to the next. While if you could develop a career in which you have a, you know, group, a lab manager that has all those skills, you know, then the transition from one student or from one student or from a postdoc to the next is completely clear. And both the PhD and the postdoc will be less stressed too, because they don't have to carry everything with them and then transfer. So they can concentrate on doing exactly what they're there to do. I mean, the fact that my students, for example, or postdocs are genotyping mice is ridiculous, but I don't have the ability to, or the money to have someone just to do that.
And just to contribute a small piece about the overwork, I think we're also role modeling that right now, because this talk started at 5 p.m. for you. I know it's part of my fault from being in Mexico, but also was expected that people will spend 2 hours of their free time for their personal development. That wasn't something that needed to be taken from their work time, which should be 9 to 5 approximately.
Sorry, one important thing that I think that is important to consider for the stress is the communication. Because, for example, during my PhD 2 years ago, I suffered a lot of anxiety and combined with depression, and I didn't know what happened to me, and I thought that this is normal or whatever. Until I communicate these feelings with my friend, and my friend told me, "This is stress. This is you are bad. You have to change." And that change give me another view, another point of view of myself. And I think that that is something that I miss in this discussion. That is the conversation between what happened, how do you feel, do you feel good, or I mean, I understand that boss or people can go inside more inside other people, but just to make sure that the student, for example, have to know that this kind of thing can happen and happens in fact.
Yeah, if I can add, this is a very interesting point, because I always think that as a PI, you are very afraid that somebody comes and asks you for personal advice or explain you about personal things, right? Because you say, okay, I'm not a psychologist and I don't have the tools to appropriately help that person. But as you say it, and I think that this one thing that maybe you are not the person to solve the problem of of your PhD student or that person in your lab, but at least you can listen. You can listen, and maybe you can just say, just listen and explain one story of yours, just to try to emphasize and maybe suggest to contact a professional or something, right? So, meaning that you don't need to be a psychologist to be a good leader. You just have to empathy to listen and maybe direct that person to somebody else that can help them. So just this thing maybe can be a big difference. And also, I think that...
May I say something? Because I lose my no. I 100% agree with you. 100%. So the first thing I said, I think, was that, it's important for us to create a little family. And, the same way that in your family you talk about everything, and maybe you don't always have the answers, but you have the ability to listen and to communicate. So I think what you said is absolutely true. But it's important to actually be able to listen and be willing to listen. Okay? So, 100% agree with you. Sorry, Elena.
Hi. But maybe it's not, we don't have to just ask when we have a problem. So I have an emotional problem of what in the specific person, but just think that there is emotion in our job and that we are people, so we normalize the fact that how do you feel today? So I've kind of not reached the point that we have a problem, but just be conscious of the boss and the student or technician and whatever, whoever feels in this moment. So for sharing the stress, for sharing our...
Yeah, but I mean, in a sense, what we're talking about is the natural skills of people. You should, just because you become a leader or a group leader or whatever, you cannot stop being a person. Okay, you cannot stop having feelings. So we had group meetings in the lab during this quarantine about once every week. And the first 10 minutes of every meeting, I just started by asking, how are you? How is your family? Are your parents okay? You know, not because I was consciously saying, well, this is what I have to do, but this is exactly what I would do with my friends too. So what you're saying is true in the sense that you have to, as a leader, you have to, you know, behave as a person who cares about your team. And not just because, you know, it's a trick. Is that I think really good leaders really care about the people who work for them.
And I have a question that I think that also David put in the table, but we're talking about guiding the students and guiding being a group leader means that you you know, guide them, but who guides you? I mean, who teach you how to be this good leader that everybody needs us to be and need you to be? I don't know. There are no resources. There are just, I don't know, YouTube tutorials, but that's not an institution providing and caring about what is being doing. I don't know. It's maybe it should be an institution, or we should take care more of this.
In my case has been part two sides. One side was training, like for example in Barcelona, we were very lucky because PRBB has a very good training, leadership training and communication training, and so I took all of those because I always like learning things. So I took a lot of those courses, and this set those recipes that then you start thinking about it, and then you start maturating and start putting in practice. But then the real life comes, and then it's experience, right? You start putting things, and you make mistakes, and then you learn from that, and then you try to improve, and so on and so on. But also, I think that what is helping me a lot is I always say that with Isabel and Gloria is having a group of peer mentoring that you can discuss your daily problems and your daily life experiences with people that is more or less at the same level than you and experience the same thing, and then you learn a lot from them. I think that this, for me, at this moment of my career, is being a tremendous help, because having peers where you can share problems or experience, and then go through having those different opinions is very important.
I think the answer to Anna's question is it's like you have to develop yourself. So you cannot wait for someone to, you know, offer you everything. You have to go and find those chances that you have for development, whether they are given by your institution or given by YouTube or, you know, following TED Talks. It has to be your own interest to develop those skills.
Yeah, but
go.
No, that it is a worldwide problem, the stress that all the students are suffering in academia. Maybe it's a worldwide problem to try to solve it in academia.
Yeah. I had a couple of thoughts about thinking also about what happened in industry and maybe some things that can also be implemented here. So as Elena mentioned, one thing is training. So go to courses, doing online courses, reading books. That's like a kind of a personal thing, and institutions should offer these things if they want their employees to have these skills. That's one. Then there is mentoring. So having people that have been in similar positions before or are now more senior now, have gone through this, and that you speak with them once a month maybe, and they share their insights, you tell them some of their problems. And mentoring is that someone with more experience in some field, and that reflects back to you and you digest some of that. Then there's coaching. which is different. In coaching, the person that's the coacher is not giving you any answer, but is helping you to come up with the answers for yourself. It's asking you open questions so you reflect on some of the things that are going on and uncover what's the real issue, what are the options, and what are you actually going to do about it. And this is actually something that can be learned. In my job, we had some trainings to be kind of a coach in the workplace. So we were not expert coaches, but we had the basics to be able to help each other. And some people do a little bit more of training so that within the organization, maybe at CABD, you end up having 10 people that are interested in knowing more about coaching. There's a training that is paid for them. And if you want to, you arrange these sessions, and maybe for 3 to 5 months, you go through coaching with them to find out how to improve one aspect of your career. Then what Elena said about peer group sharing and learning from each other, I think is fantastic, because it's like a support group that's also much needed. And the last one is reverse coaching, which I took part in some where some senior leaders, some people in the executive team were kind of coached by very junior people. And by doing this, of telling the junior people what are some of the challenges that you are facing, you hear very different perspectives about how to deal with them. And you also gain some empathy for the people that you are not even managing, but they're even being managed by some of the people that you're managing, and things like that.
So is there any other question? I think we touched it already. We have like a breaking the ice question that we didn't need it actually. But so the question was, what is for you success? And if we need to redefine to give space to more diverse types of leadership.
That's a tough question, and I'll tell you why. Because what you consider success is not necessarily what the scientific community and the guys who are giving you the money consider success, okay? So in my case, I said at the beginning, success is to have a good balance between your family and your work, and really creating a nice environment to work. At the end of the day, we spend most of our lives working, and you don't want to do that in an environment which is horrible. So if you are able to create a good environment, being able to produce in science something which is interesting for you and for others, you don't have to have 20 postdocs. That's my view, okay? That is what I think success is. It's a perfect balance between family and work, and really creating that family in your workplace.
Yeah, I agree with Jaime. I also think that maybe more important, or as important as redefining success, is also redefining failure, or being able to, because there was somebody, some quote that say that somebody successful is somebody that is able to live with and to go on with failure. And I don't know, but in science is something that unless you are able to do so, you are not going to not to suffer from mental health for sure. So and the problem is the community itself is not allowing, is not working for failure to be normalized, to be accepted, and to be something that is part of our work and is something natural, and nothing happened. You are not less good or more good to not to show that and accept it, right? So for me, this is a big, for success is important that as a community accept and live with and normalize failure.
Any more?
How do you see success, Anna? You asked the question.
Me? I asked the question. Well, it was more of the gender, but in my opinion, the problem of success is linked to the world of academia. It's as simple as we were discussing. We are competing with each other when we were supposed to be sharing data and everything. And I think that the whole hierarchy of work in academia is completely wrong, and it's what it is the real source of stress and the real problem here, more than even the leadership or even other problems. Everything is derived from the structure of the how success is measured in academia.
Mm-hmm. But I agree with, well, I'm not a group leader yet, but sorry, it was a joke. But I agree with you both, and I think, so for me, and this is related to Anna's answer, is that you need your team is your new, well, not your new family, but your other family. And for me, to publish thousands of papers, it doesn't matter if at the end of the day, so the people in your team go home crying because they are unhappy. And for me, this is important. And also it's important that once you are a leader, so you need that the people that are in your team have a path, a prospective path after they are in your team. So you want them to succeed in their future jobs.
If I can add something, because from the leader perspective, one problem also, and I go back to the problem of precarity, because when you don't have funds, when you don't have money to pay people and to give this stability and to give these good conditions to the people that work with you, it's very difficult to make your group your family, because I explain myself. I mean, you want the best for the members of your family. You want the best to give them, and then I think that maybe this is a reflection, but maybe in a country in Spain where there are very little opportunities and there are very little funds, you put a distance because you don't want to establish this family link, to worry too much about people. You put a distance and you put this temporality in the relationship, because you know, and it's very stressful for you, thinking that you are not going to be able to give stability and to give all of what that person merits. I don't know if I explain myself properly, but you know what. So this is as a young PI, this is something that you will experience.
Mm-hmm.
But I think that the important thing is that you give all the tools that you have at your disposal for those people to develop. And, you know, what happens afterwards is not in a sense of responsibility. Obviously, you know, you want all of them to succeed. And I go back to, my example, which is always my kids. So you give all the tools, and then they have to take the decisions and follow their own paths. But you fail as a parent, and I think you fail as a PI if you don't give those tools. Okay?
Yeah, and you have to be honest.
Yeah.
To be very honest from the beginning on which are the conditions and which are the possibilities.
And I'd like to contribute to this from my experience on success. is that we tend to see this as a very narrow path, that it's a very narrow path in the field that you need to keep on going to be considered successful. And that if you don't go one step after another in that straight path, then you're not going to be successful. Which I think it's a mental issue. It's a bias that we have, because the field is full of paths. There's a lot of paths for people. There's a lot of pathways, lots of